Hello Internet, let's talk about homeschooling in the United States. Before this video begins, here's what I'll be going over. 1. Assess some of the shortcomings of homeschooling in the United States. 2. Validate my experience in this matter as anecdotal. And 3. Propose new ideas and possible legislation for change. It's important to keep in mind that this is my version of homeschooling and that my experiences on this time were negative to the point that I made this video and this channel. If you cannot fully grasp that not all homeschooling is the same, or that my experience was unique and not all homeschoolers have a negative experience, this video might make you feel uncomfortable. I'm sure that we all know someone that was homeschooled and that became a net positive for them. I'm not talking about those people. And if you can't fully grasp that, this video really might not be for you. It is not my goal in this video to improve or inflate public education in the United States. I hope that public education in the United States only improves in the future. However, making that happen is not a topic for this video. So those are two really big qualifications that I want you to keep in mind before you comment, like, share, or even continue watching this video. Now, with that being said, this video is broken up into 5 parts of homeschooling that I would like to explore. With my experience being raised homeschooled and never attending public school throughout my life, now, as an adult, I would like to clue others in on the version of homeschooling that I was exposed to and the possible repercussions that version of homeschooling can have on someone living in the United States. When I reflect on the actual social skills I gained as a child and young adult, I know that it was difficult for me to slow down, especially when it came to making friends. I was always in a hurry to take any new relationship and turn it into a close friendship. I think a factor in this type of behavior was my early relationship environment. Like, I can remember back in my homeschool days always feeling like I was in a hurry to take anybody I was having fun with and turn them into my close friends. After all, I didn't know when or if I was ever going to see them again. I only had a few days a month to make friends. For me, that happened at church, homeschool group, and Little League. I had to make the most out of every interaction, and this carried through to my adult life and created some real issues for me. Now, as an adult, I've worked through a lot of this. I feel much more comfortable with boundaries and letting relationships happen naturally. However, this was and still kind of is sometimes an issue for me. I think there are issues with many homeschoolers' ability to network for career opportunities. My very first real job was in the construction industry, and it was a construction company owned by a graduated homeschooler. And this graduated homeschooler hired mostly underage homeschooled children, not even as his full-time employees, but as private contractors. So that as private contractors, we weren't really entitled to the same benefits, or really any benefits, to be honest, as a full-time employee. And me, as a homeschool child being employed as a private contractor, I never really felt like I had the bargaining position or power to change any of this at any point. After all, if I did get fired, I would probably have a difficult time finding new employment without any connections, unless I wanted to work a minimum wage job, which I could have done, but I knew that I could work many more hours than a public school student. So I spent most of my young adult life working over 40 hours a week without overtime pay. I worked this job for almost 5 years, and I never really made that much money. Nobody ever taught me how to manage my money. This overall lack of professional network made it difficult whenever I moved to a new city and I tried to transition into a new workforce. So I ended up having to work a lot of temp jobs at this new city until a family member of mine connected me with a full-time job. And overall, this lack of professional network has impacted me negatively career-wise ever since I've worked a job. My first point is the overall lack of access to professional coaching in homeschooling. I don't think anyone would argue that having a coach is incredibly important, especially if you want to become competitive at high levels in a sport. I had a Little League coach, and he was great. He was a volunteer. I don't remember him being like a super athlete in any way. And the state that I was homeschooled in allowed me to play sports at the Little League level, but not past that. So if I wanted any type of access to a professional coach in baseball, after Little League, I was going to have to hire someone. Remember, this would be an issue for any homeschooler that wants to learn how to play an instrument or paint or sing. You get the idea. Having an experienced coach matters. I've had good coaches and bad coaches in my life. And that's one of the reasons why I put this down as one of my points. So, if you homeschool and your homeschool student wants to play on a sports team professionally, you're going to have to find a way to allow them to play with a team and have access to professional coaching. In all honesty, both. This is something to consider. On this note, I want to talk about a homeschool friend that I have and his athletic experience. I have a friend, and while he and I were being homeschooled, his brothers and I would often play football with neighborhood kids. My friend is incredibly athletic. He has great genetics. He was usually very dominating in these football games, along with his brothers. The whole family was incredibly athletic and homeschooled. He and I later became roommates at university, and he wanted to play for the university football team, so he tried out as a walk-on. He did not make the team. I tell you all this just to say that all the athleticism in the world does not compare to having an experienced coach or playing on a team regularly. And homeschoolers are at a disadvantage when it comes to playing on team sports. The same thing applies to art scholarships. How many homeschoolers have scholarships in the arts? How many homeschoolers have scholarships to play an instrument in an orchestra? Like, how many homeschoolers have ever even played in an orchestra? If you want to get good at a team sport or team art project, especially to a professional level, is homeschooling even a good option for you? Now, with that being said, I do want to say there are some homeschool scholarships allotted, and I put a link in the description, so if you have time, check that out. If you are a parent that's thinking about homeschooling, I think it's incredibly important that you become familiar with learning disabilities. My story on this is that I had a real difficult time learning to read, especially when it came to learning phonetics. It took me a real long time to grasp phonetics in general, meaning anytime I encountered a new word, it would take me a very long time before I was able to pronounce that word correctly. Now, as an adult, I mostly let Google do the pronunciation. That being said, I can remember as a kid, one of my earliest memories was crying in my mom's bedroom after an afternoon that felt like an eternity of trying to learn phonetics as a kid. Also, because of my issues with phonetics, I'm unable to spell large words. That being said, as an adult, I have Google, so I'm able to read and spell check, I'm able to write. However, if those technologies did not exist, there's no way that I would have passed any of my college or university essay exams. I can still remember the anxiety that I would get going into one of these essay university exam tests, knowing that I couldn't pull out my phone to spell check any words, and knowing that I was going to have to write a long essay form answer. So I would use simple language. I would narrow my vocabulary to words that I knew that I could spell. This made me feel stupid. I felt that I came off as childish and uneducated. It impacted my confidence and overall held me back. This all culminated for me in a way that finally made sense my senior year at university. I was taking a final in my Latin class, and part of that final was reading out loud to your Latin teacher. Now, I'm not someone that reads out loud very well or is very comfortable with reading out loud, so once again, anxiety was involved. However, I can remember reading out loud to my Latin teacher and coming across a word that I was unfamiliar with, her being very supportive and trying to remind me all the rules for pronunciation in Latin. Meanwhile, I'm having all this anxiety. I'm having these flashbacks of me in the bedroom crying with my mom over phonetics. And I can remember my Latin teacher putting down her notepad and asking me in the most kind way, "Have you ever been tested for dyslexia?" The answer was no. No one had tested me for dyslexia, and no one had ever questioned the fact that I couldn't read until I was almost a preteen. It was at this point that my Latin teacher was probably starting to think I might be dyslexic, and I was having pretty much a full-on anxiety attack. After all, one of my greatest insecurities was being laid bare by someone that I respected and deeply wanted to gain the approval of. You know, I often wonder what would have happened if I would have been diagnosed with dyslexia or any learning disability from a young age. I wonder what resources would have been allotted to me. I wonder what techniques I would have gained to help me as an adult. I'm telling my story to elucidate the issue of some parents not being able to identify learning disabilities within their children. This can happen for a myriad of reasons. However, I feel that teachers are exposed to more children with disabilities, and I feel that teachers are better equipped to identify the signs of a learning disability. So, if we grant that parents are not always capable of identifying a learning disability within a homeschool student, I don't think it's that far of a stretch to question the amount of trust we put in those same parents when it comes to their ability to identify physical and emotional abuse as well. If I once again recall my own homeschooling experience, most of the parents would spank or in some cases strike their children. And me and my brother were both spanked, and all of this seemed completely normal in the environment that we were all in. And I'm not saying that spanking is the same thing as physical abuse. What I am going to say is I saw things within this community that I, now as an adult, would label abuse. I do think that the homeschool environment does lend itself to isolation in some cases. And within this environment, how likely is it for a homeschool student to be noticed that has been abused and get the help that they need? Now, take that same student and put them in a public school situation where there's professionals trained to notice abuse and there's a system in place to report it. Situations like this can lead a public school faculty member to uncover abuse happening at a student's home or somewhere else. Homeschool students don't have this option. If homeschool students are being abused, the likelihood of their abuser being brought to justice is more slim. You can decide what more slim means or how important this point is to you, but if we want less abuse, it's a point.
Heads up, I was homeschooled the whole way through without a TV, so adjust your expectations accordingly. I don't know a lot of things. I don't. I do consider myself a lifelong learner, though, because I realized it's going to take me the rest of my life to catch up. Here's the thing. The thing about homeschooling is, even if you graduate top of your class, like my brother did, at best, you know about as much as your parents. And neither one of my parents went to college. So I basically graduated with an early 1970s high school education. Guys, that's about what I'm working with.
I will say that my homeschool community did meet up about twice a month, and the way that this group was structured was other people's moms would teach you subjects based off their connection to that subject, and that connection was usually pretty vague. From what I know, most of the moms did not pursue any higher education, and most did not have any experience teaching. So what this means is I would end up learning biology from someone who was an ex-nurse, or music from someone who could read music or play an instrument. The only ancient history that I was taught in my experience being homeschooled was Hebrew and a very PG Greco-Roman ancient history. As far as modern history goes, I was given that old milquetoast, Christians were persecuted all throughout history version of history that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. If you are not familiar with the milquetoast version, there's a link in this video description of one of my favorite YouTubers, Knowing Better. He's explaining this exact version that I'm talking about and the issues with it. This is it. This is what I'm advocating for. If I would have been tested in the most basic reading or science, there would have been some eyebrows raised. And it's this way in a lot of states. In fact, most states don't require the amount of regulation that I'm advocating for. According to the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, only 5 states have what this website calls high regulation. I know that this is the part of the video that people will clip the most, so it is important to be clear here. I am advocating for federal involvement because some states seem to not consider this an issue. And I hope that changes. I hope every state wakes up and passes new legislation to ensure that every homeschooler within their state has access to resources, is well educated, and not abused. I know I said I would not qualify anything at the beginning of this video, but I'm gonna make an exception here. Regulation is not punishment. It's not taking away your kids because they messed up the quadratic formula. And it's definitely not forcing homeschool parents to talk to their students about culturally diverse issues. What it could and should be is ensuring that homeschool families have the resources that they need and ensuring that the environment is safe. That's it. My solution is testing and addressing any educational needs that are lacking. My solution is opening the door to more homeschool, public school integration in sports and the arts. My solution is more certified teachers that are able to help a struggling homeschool student in a subject they are certified to teach. There is a lot of middle ground on this issue, and I don't see why each state couldn't approach it in their own way. Pair that with some loose federal regulation to ensure that these issues are actually addressed, and I think we have a start. Lastly, I advocate for tests because of the data we could obtain from it. I think it would be beneficial for us to know exactly how these homeschool students could be helped. I think it's fair to say that indoctrination can happen to anyone. However, feeling like you don't fit into society and having small social networks can amplify the conditions for indoctrination. Let me explain. Not being around people of differing backgrounds, views, religions, or cultures gave me a narrow view of humans. And how I interacted with them from a young age was predicated on my experience as a homeschooler. I had difficulty making friends that were not other homeschoolers, and this was the norm for me all the way up until college, where I made some friends usually at parties. And I think the big issue here is homeschoolers' ability to understand and engage with complex social situations and friendships, especially in a party scene or a high-stress scene. I also lacked experience in more complicated social issues, like I didn't know what to look for in a scam, or how to prevent being taken advantage of financially in a lot of ways, or even really how to structure a logical argument. I saw many homeschoolers that I grew up with fall for conspiracy theories or get roped into some sort of pyramid scheme, and then they would turn around and sell these same ideas or products to other homeschoolers within this tight-knit community. So the cycle continued. This deserves its own video, trust me. I might get to that some point. I'm talking about street smarts, and I don't really know how you test for that. But I do know, for example, that an individual who does not have a basic understanding of human biology or chemistry or nutrition, that individual is more likely to be seduced by other forms or other ideas of medicine that are outside of practice medicine. I saw many examples of this within my own homeschool community. So we have limited social network, overall inexperience within systems, and then we need to add the abundance of conspiracy theories and misinformation that's already floating out there. And in my case, the integration of conspiracy into curriculum. But that's another video. Homeschooling is viewed in United States society as a rebuttal to the system. It is taking the education away from the government and putting it in your own hands. This has some hints of government bad. And government bad can mean whatever you want it to mean. I think all United States citizens land somewhere on the spectrum of believing that government bad. It's one of the things that still unites all of us. All of that being said, I'm going to make a statement. Homeschoolers tend to land on the far ends of government bad spectrum. Let me explain. When people create a lifestyle around the opposition of public education, higher education, the government, and form a community where distrust in institutions is a core belief in that community, so they pull their children out of these institutions to begin educating them themselves. They integrate this antitrust culture into the education. Now pair that with an overall lack of integration into society. Keep both of those factors alive in your mind while you answer this question. how susceptible to misinformation is a homeschool student in that environment versus a public school student in a different environment. It's important to remember the qualifications I made at the beginning of this video. Furthermore, there are many videos on homeschooling that are much more positive. There's even videos on Christian nationalism homeschooling and young earth creationism homeschooling. If that's your thing, you're in luck. However, I am not alone. There are other homeschoolers that are now adults and are telling their story online. Linked in this video description are a few of the content creators that are telling their story and getting involved with changing the dialogue on homeschooling in the United States. Lastly, if you're a homeschooler, feel free to tell me your experience. I'd love to hear it. Also, it doesn't matter where you land on this issue. If you want to see more content from me about homeschooling, feel free to like, subscribe, check out the links below. Thank you. Amore et studio elucidande veritatis.